So like basically, I'm totally my question that like my good is only right about like my feeling that like to spend like things like around for internship like this with spending possibly being different that with like my feeling that way. Like I'm going that will be like actually waiting because like I'm looking like with like 11 like recent frequent repetitive use of like 11 like superpowers like it might have taken a toll on 11 to the point that like I'm looking like 11 like this kind of the different that even after like 11 will be that come back to like come back conscious like even then like I'm looking like 11 at that point I'm that was touching them on the practice but at that point 11 won't be able to like use have superpowers at all. It's like the scenario that I'm looking at. And especially with like even though 11 has taken out a bunch of like Brenner's team members like I'm like still there will be like even more like I'm like even look like we're taking out a bunch of like other team members and even more of like element like army like showing up and then the capturing that might make a sense of them as well as like 11 and taking them and imprisoning putting them into like an imprisoned kind of state in like another energy level. Like the scenario that I'm looking. So like at that point I'm looking like might look at and busting being in like with same like interrogation kind of like a room. While I'm looking like in the case of 11 like I'm looking like Brenner and his team might have like address the 11 current situation and then also bring like 11 would be like for 8 push to 11 would be like rolling in the given us. That's the scenario that I'm looking at. So more like the scenario that I'm looking is like that Brenner and team will be bringing 11 back like 2003 at all like 11 regaining back consciousness. But like at that point like straight away like Brenner trying to like make 11 use of superpower but like at that point like 11 probably being unable to like use superpower or like Brenner might know as to like why 11 might have gone on to like it might have been. So like Brenner figuring that out and so like Brenner deciding to like give 11 Brenner realizing that like 11 won't be able to like use superpower for like at least a few days with their other like Brenner relating to like Brenner so like only major deciding to like give 11 that do trust and the structure brings the voting to that maybe Brenner is like might be that might have more use for 11 and that might not be trying to like take 11 like right now like the other person scenario so like if that's the scenario then another different like Brenner like only giving deciding to like give 11 the rest for like the time being so that like 11 to recover and that once again be able to like have access to 11 that's it about so like I'm something like in the up and I'm looking at that point like my question of being progressed by and the team where like I'm looking at that so like my just reinforcement is for like the scenario that I'm looking for is for like after like for enough time 16 would be captured my percent of thing like I'm looking like the interrogation of like my clip and of by Brenner I'm just going to do certainly Brenner that to be interrogating that my clip and of so like during that interrogation definitely like it will be I'm just bringing perfectly for to be like person that among like my clips and being like person that would be like scared from so like at that point like I'm looking like Brenner protein noticing that and like I'm looking Brenner most likely like staring at like specifically Dustin and like Brenner asking Dustin asking that to basically explain and reveal everything that first of all to that reveal to the runner up to like where they have seen 11 and they need to explain everything they did after like meeting 11. So like at that point, also going like Dustin only like with this sort of things there that Dustin would be revealing it again. Like not everything but like that Dustin will be revealing a lot of everything they did after like meeting 11. So and then like I'm bring like runner only asking Dustin and then at that point, I was only looking for like runners. They only asked question as to like where exactly like Nancy and Jonathan are hiding as right now. Like basically at that point, I was looking at Dustin doing for that's to like basically lie to like runner, telling him that basically Nancy and Jonathan are not part of that part of this and basically say don't know anything about like 11 like along the lines of the like that's really trying to like live to like but like runner won't be buying that out. So like at that point like runner was running totally like trying to like stop my good like runner like at that point I was like threatening to say Mike like in front of like Lucas and at that point it's like the scenario that I'm looking for. So like at that point I was like where Lucas like and then like would be like getting seriously scared for like Mike that like at that point Lucas would be about to uh, shout out like the whereabouts of like Nancy and John but like right before that like I'm different right as Lucas will be able to shout that out like I'm like Dustin totally shouting over Lucas in like the scenario that I'm looking. And what Dustin and the difference to tell Brenner at that point would be like that like Dustin remembers right now that basically like basically Troy and his friend knows about like 11 have no, have seen like 11 has seen firsthand like 11 using her state of powers. Like they see that like revealed that under the brain at that point for like Duncan to like make to Brenner at that point. So totally prevented us from like revealing like about like Nancy and Jonathan knowing being part of that all this and knowing about 11 to say them like the scenario that I was over. But like I'm going to bring like and at that point, like through that revelation of that thing, like end of the point, like Troy as well as his friends, that it becomes becoming like part of like like target is like the scenario that I'm the but still, at that point, like on top of having like the direct towards like if you we have direct towards like Troy, like would be only using like that so that Troy notes of like notes of like Troy and his notes of 11 like a strategy to like to prevent like anything from revealing about like Jonathan as well as Nancy knowing about it and the scenario that I'm putting. Yet like I'm just like even though Brenner would be hearing this like I'm just like still Brenner would be like also getting like the strong feeling that basically like the kids are basically trying to like hide a lot of things and lying around would be like around the lines like I'm with the Brenner. Brenner would be getting like the feeling. So like I'm just like Brenner telling them that this is not over. And basically like I'll be back the next day will be around the line Brenner will be telling Mike with the contestant and basically Brenner at that point like leaving Brenner and like be about like for that days like the scenario that I'm going to bring. So like I was doing like it was the night time at that point and basically then I was doing like in like the middle of the night like I was doing like yeah, most likely being like I was doing there will be only like the security guard, a single security guard alone and the one actually will be like most likely standing outside like the door interrogation door of like the interrogation room or like my because will be in that kind of like a locked up and like kind of like some kind of favor character scenario that I'm looking for. So like I was doing like Mike, since like Mike was like the first person to like see Brenner and his like entire army of team like approaching like performance so the chapter 11 like since it was Mike that had first seen then Brenner showing up there like I was doing like might even back then might have like straight away quickly like taken some sort of like weapons to like basically because like might have only expected such an different kind of like a scenario so like to free himself and free like Lucas and Dustin like and save 11 like might have only quickly slipped in some sort of like a weapon even at that point it's like the scenario that I'm doing. So like from like Runner's LinkedIn rotation would be over and Runner would be like for the day and basically the runner will be leaving for another energy about it. And like at that point I was thinking like it will be just like uh and at that point I was thinking like even though the only physically like I'm just thinking like swiftly and steadily like I'm just thinking like Mike taking out pulling out that weapon and Mike freeing himself and to be freeing like Dustin and this is like the scenario that I'm just thinking. And right then itself, I'm looking for like Mike Lucas and Dustin like putting something like them using some sort of like a strategy to that to basically to escape from like the guard that will be standing right outside to escape from that interrogation room while at the same time also sometimes they even escaping from like the guard that will be guarding like the door of that that's guarding from outside of like the door of like, the interrogation room. Like the scenario that I'm looking again, then like Mike Lucas and Dustin like quickly making being able to like make it to 11 within that Brenner's energy laboratory. And even that, and at that point, I'm also thinking like, even though 11 by then would have gained back 11 that consciousness, like still 11 will be like kind of like in an extra kind of like a state. And even though 11 will be able to run like 11 won't be able to, because of the exhaustion, like 11 won't be able to like run for long. So like I'm looking like at that point, Mike and also definitely like taking the decision to like basically asking 11 as to like where exactly is the gate within like one of the laboratory is. And then also from like that 11 Texas 11 like telling Mike as to like where exactly to run to and as they would be like strictly chased after by without much great delay itself like and when previously the TV like the a bunch of security guards would be like running after like Mike. and Dustin at 11, and like they will be almost able to catch up to them, like I'm also from like Mike, Lucas, Dustin, as well as like 11 would have made it to like the game within that run of the and like through those gates like without any protective suit or anything like I'm just like Mike, Lucas, and Dustin and 11 escaping into like the parallel world. And that way getting away from like Brenner, like it's like the scenario that I'm also talking and also the thing on the brain direction that I'm sitting on this video that like that says that well that if we even have recently communicated through like the through like the dark void like the recently like I'm but like that will won't be like the actual will but like it will be like the parallel version of will definitely with mention and still taking my presentation as well like the monster like I'm looking at the monster will be like the egg that was like found next to like captain by where like that will was like hiding and had shown the communication and the hurry like I'm looking that egg, that hatched egg that was like right next to near to like the tent, near to like Captain Bios like might have been due to like basically that these monsters and the different like that monster might have straight away captured on capturing will like that monster might have the bad version of will like that monster might have straight away taken will the bad version of which like the million of brain so like I'm then still taking about the brain as to like how like the monster would be like laying egg, like I'm looking like every time it feeds, like every time it eats, like it will be like laying egg. That will be how like the monster would be like laying egg on its own. Like that will be how the power will be working for like the monster and like the necessary condition for it to be able to like lay egg will be like for it to like feed and eat. It's certainly my best impression. So like I'm just like what might have happened would be like as soon as after like without much creative at all, like taking like the parallel version of the life, like I'm something like the monster might have laid that egg that was like uh, near to like cattle by in like the parallel world that which like Joyce as well as like Hopper had recently just now seen in like the parallel might have been and for like even the egg would be like hatching at like an extremely quick pace. It's also definitely my better impression. So that might have been what might have happened is definitely my preference, but some better still taking on it. So like the flavor of the impressions is that basically by the time like the season one of like kinds of things will be like ending like I'm running the scenario to be like my Lucas Dustin as well as like 11 escaping from Brenner and his team and is entering into like the battle world. And in parallel, like I'm talking like the situation with like Joyce as well as Hopper at that point will be like them through exploring through like the battle dimension and finally finding like Will dead body, like the scenario that I'm discussing. But like that won't be like the dead body of like the actual Will, but that would be like the body of like the parallel version of Will that was just caused by like the monster. Especially remember brain rush. So like the and in the case of like Nancy Johnson and Steve like and the one like towards like in parallel, like they will be at that point entering into like the parallel world through like at the next encounter that like Steve, Nancy and Jonathan will be having with like the monster like and something like them like and then the like maybe like somehow like Nancy and Jonathan like either figuring out like the monster had escaped and survived or like I'm super like or like the possibility that I'm super is for like another monster to like show up to like the real world so like the Bopal and really at that point like Nancy Jonathan and Steve like constantly happening to like be nearby and them not seeing those like monster at the distance and so like and those like at that point like I'm just like maybe like them deciding to like enter like the parallel world and like once like the monster they'll just simply observing like the monster and not like the monster will be like leading into like the parallel world like at that point like Nancy Jonathan as well as Steve like leading through that very same portal into like that way making it to like the parallel world again. It's like the scenario that I'm looking for. So like these three things like happening in parallel like with like the theme of like Mike Lucas Dustin as well as like 11 like entering into like the battle world as well as the team of like Steve, Nancy, and John that entering into like the battle world and simultaneously that Joyce as well as getting like the ultimate shock with like them finding like with dead bodies in like the battle world but like that would be like the dead body, like the parallel version of it, and not like the actual death. It's like these three things happening simultaneously. While season one will be ending is like the eventual corpse of scenarios like I'm also something and like the three and and I'm also like at that point like the reason for like Nancy and Jonathan like deciding like to like the parallel world will be totally full like basically at that point like at that point like Nancy and also something maybe for like scenario to be like Nancy and Jonathan probably thinking out like that will be that monster that they had burnt like basically that monster might have totally like so like that like some of that they would be seen after that like would be like a new monster. So like at that point maybe like Nancy and Jonathan softly realizing that basically there are multiple monsters. So like basically at that point like Nancy and Jonathan deciding to like destroy like take out like all the monsters and like destroy all the monsters and like to know that like them deciding to like the parallel world and they are like entering like the parallel world and they are like finding all the monsters and taking out all the monsters like that they are revenge for like the death of Barbara. Like the scenario that I'm looking at, Steve at that point would be like feeling as if like he has no other option but to like tag along, especially because of like Steve still will be having that feelings towards like Nancy, and she and Steve probably wouldn't want like the last thing Steve would want would be that at that point would be Nancy getting into like some serious trouble and something happened to like Nancy, and solely due to like this treatment, and like Steve totally feeling as if he has other choice but to like tag along with like Nancy and Jonathan, and that basically as well entering into like the battleground of that point with like Nancy and Jonathan. It's like the scenario, temple with again with the energy. Also, like the name of the direction right now, that like Hopper as well as those like following like the trail of blood of like the monster, like and the different like definitely like the huge credit that they have made it through right now in like the battle world would be that Hawkins mid school in like the battle world so like another like there within like that Hawkins mid school and the like Hopper and George like still keeping on following like the trails and like eventually like them as they would be like entering deeper into like the Hawkins mid school like and the like all of a sudden like then being ambushed, attacked in an ambush manner by like the monster is like the scenario that I was about, but still ambushed like the monster is extremely like badly injured. It is like the scenario from that sort burn and so it's like I'm like the monster will be extremely injured yet like I'm looking for like the monster to still try for like an ambush attack, but like I'm looking still like like at that point like pulling out his weapon I just believe there's a thing like most likely like the most of attacking Joy to like the scenario that I'm so like hop up quickly pulling out with like a and really hop up that way, like taking out like the most of and saving Joy's like the scenario that I'm doing. But like I'm doing like precisely while Hopper will be using like weapon and like that huge sound of like the weapons will be heard. Not only that the huge sound of that weapon as like Hopper will be using it to like take out like the monster like and the screen of like the monster as well and like maybe that people like would be people at that point would be surprisingly most likely would be hurt through like the Hawkins miracles in like the real world where like a runner would be hopefully trying to like take not only 11 but like Mike represent of sin like so another that and so like while the runner would be hopefully trying to take them like and sort of them hearing like this huge sound of like the from like the battle like so like of Hopper and then at that point like the people like probably that Mike lit up end of sin as those even like microchip industry would be only still even at that point would be unaware that basically it was like Hopper that had told Brenner about like them being at like Hawkins Middle School. It's like hiding at like Hawkins Middle School. It's definitely one of the information like microchip industry won't be at all aware. And like Hopper's intent behind even revealing that the hideout of like microchip industry as well as 11 would be precisely due to like Hopper would be like basically trying to put on a fake actor to like Hopper doesn't care about like 11 and that Brenner to like probably take 11 back but like uh would be like Hopper's like practical plan to like totally protect ensure the protection of like Mike look at industry and definitely one of the so like Hopper might have totally was constantly thought that basically like Brenner had got 11 like on top of like or completely lack of possibly think that they should be runner in the deciding to take hope that is the runner like so that's for the chasing after 11 will be not to like take 11's life On top of that, like or concentrating in that way, we think like 11 has like all these superpowers, like basically Hopper, that like Brenner will be like having need for like 11 and basically won't be taking 11's life. Like so, even after like capturing 11, will be along the lines of like Hopper that Hopper have, and also from that like Hopper might have also something different that they will like Brenner get back 11 that then Brenner and his team will be leaving like might Lucas and such and so that like Hopper might have planned that is lead by for him to like in like the battle world even though he'll be able to like find Will and one he will be fighting Will for Hopper and Joyce to like basically Hopper to bring back like Will as well as Joyce to like safety back into through the gate in like one of the merge like offering to like the real world and to get them all back safely home so that like and also like from that the next day on like Hopper could like totally like make his move and basically and then would like even Hopper like would be totally planning according to like Hopper's plan like Hopper would be also planning on like getting all sorts of evidence from like the battle world so that like he could like totally after returning back finding Will and saving Will and returning back to like the real world Hopper might be planning on like using all that evidence to like basically bring like Brenner and just like an of the laboratory betray Brenner and like an of the laboratory and usually bring Brenner and his like an of the laboratory down to a legal battle and usually that way to like that way save 11 and basically that way to like basically get 11 back to like careers is that will be like the potential strategical plan of that pop-up company like pop-up would be like totally or concentrating that like Brenner and Steam won't be like capturing like Mike Lucas and Dustin along with like right now with the hero with them but like I'm looking like so like that Brenner would be like hopefully Brenner and Steam would be like hopefully on top of taking 11 with taking Mike Lucas and Dustin as well. But the thing like at that point like with like the like Mike Lucas and Dustin like hearing as well as Brenner like hearing the sound of like the weapon coming from like the barrel and at that point, like I'm looking like Michael Lucas understand like straight away, like feeling that as in like it will definitely be like Hopper's weapon that sound will be like so. Like I'm looking straight away like Michael Lucas understand at that point, self like from Hawkins principle, since like Hopper as well as George as well will be like right beneath where like Michael Lucas understand will be like possibly being taken away by Turner. So like I'm looking like at that point like Mike Lucas has been shouting out to like Hopper that in like the parallel world that basically that 11 and them have been like captured by like basically along the line like on the like Mike Lucas has been shouting out to like that way reach like 11 that way to them to like be able to like reach that Hopper in like the parallel world in hopes that shouting will be reaching Hopper in like the parallel world and then the thing like that exactly happening and Hopper as well as Joy hearing this is like definitely my premise and at that point like the opera will would be like totally worried and at that point still I'm going to like Hopper totally down himself down and everything and some Joyce down and Hopper telling Joyce that they will leave and Hopper and Joyce at that point would like come to the realization that like the only time they have left in like the parallel world to find and save Will and basically bring Will back to like another level would be like time until the runoff. And I was in the cockroaches straight away thinking that really runoff won't be like taking the life of like Mike Lucas and thing before like a thorough interrogation. Be along the line Hopper everything especially because like Hopper everything then they release runoff would know as to like who else knows of like the knows the truth about like 11 especially with the Rangers. So in order to find that out the runner will be thoroughly interrogating like Mike Lucas and Dustin before taking their life would be along the line Hopper would be thinking at that point like scenario that I was open. So like Hopper at that point telling Joyce that they will be and basically both of them come to that realization that point that is the only time they have left to like basically find and save when entering the back to like another laboratory. It's time until that Branagh and his team have basically done with their interrogation of like Mike Lucas and Dustin. So that like at that point like Branagh and his team will be like uh, might definitely try to like take that like the life of like eliminate like Mike Lucas and Dustin. So like before that like Hopper as well as like George has to like find Will and basically save it and return back to like the energy laboratory with Will and then stop run his team somehow. That will be along the lines of the people like Hopper as well as Joyce like coming to that conclusion and conclusive kind of like a final decision for them and like them recognizing that that like their task up ahead for them to like achieve. It's like the scenario that I'm going to also, the really massive career question right now is also that basically copper as well as they might have even while even infiltrating into like energy lab what we just now it's like copper might have changed prepared with Johnson's like camera. It's actually massive question like there might have definitely been like Johnson's camera that in copper format or something like I'm also like it might be like a compact kind of that camera that could be that maybe it's definitely my preference. Like copper might have definitely hidden Johnson's camera somehow, and I would like definitely as part of like copper's like practical plan to like bring an umbrella and it's like teams down like and like copper would be totally collecting evidence by like using like the camera to like take all the photos of like the parallel so that like that way that eventually like copper not to like save in order to like simultaneously save 11 as well as that to bring that Brenner and that energy level way down Hopper would be able to like use all that photos of like the paddleboard to show to like the god like would be planning on that way proving to like the god that basically of like the existence of like the paddleboard through the photos in such a manner would be that Brenner's through photos or like maybe even through videos of like the paddleboard that like under the point like Hopper would be right now uh, taking of like the parallel but which would be just unreal for like the time being, especially my question. So it's like definitely on the prediction right now with like the light in like the national level of bringing and basically Mike saying right now saying like definitely my predictions that like so like 11 taking out like from a few of like from screen numbers and that would out basically like drawn attention of like that exact monster like it would be that exact monster which I'm developing right now to like show up through like the portal from like the parent world into like comics where like 11 might get the kind of an emperor would be it's like the scenario. It would be that exact monster who got burned by Nancy and John was like and Steve's like fight against that monster in like very soon like basically it would be that exact monster that I'm looking right now to show up to Hawkins middle school right now in like the real world in front of like and I'm looking like this to be like the point where like Mike Lucas and Justin would be for like the first time would be seeing like the monster it's like the scenario that I'm looking and so like I'm looking like that is like monster like basically creating a portal and showing up and I'm looking like by then Hopper as well as George wouldn't even though they would be also present in like Hawkins middle school in like the parallel world like still they would have them even then at that point might have not have thought up to like the monster even at that point it's like the scenario that I'm looking so like the monster creating like the what most likely from like the floor reflecting scenario that I'm different. And the monster showing up, Mike Lucas and Dustin like totally being shocked and scared at seeing like the monster. 11 as well suddenly being scared. Like and then like luckily that exact monster would be also like the very same monster that might have recognized that might have that kind of like recognized and try was like trying to communicate with like 11 while 11 made uh, communication through like the dark void while that during that kind of experiment like is that size monster that try to like back and try to like, communicate with 11 and so think about the condition would be like that monster would be like the parallel version of like 11 like basically the parallel version of Brenner like experiment might have gone wrong and like the parallel version of 11 might have caused like the parallel version of 11 to turn into like the very first monster might have been what might have happened and to be that very same monster that I'm right now would be like showing up to like the real world population stores and that in front of like Magic and Rusting and Brenner and 11 like the scenario that I'm about so like the monster showing up thrown by the scent of like the blood but like I'm like that's like the scenario that I'm talking about. Like writers take the monster showing up, like the monster seeing 11 and take the monster recognizing 11 is like the scenario that I'm talking about. And like the monster like straight away charging towards like 11 and the monster quickly grabbing 11 and like taking 11 and taking 11 and basically like leaving back through like the portal back through like the battle world is like the scenario that I'm talking about. And at that point Mike would be getting that see that fight would be like that into a number would be such uh, an extreme shock for Mike that I'm looking for Mike totally shouting out 11 and fearlessly chasing after like the monster through like that portal and basically Mike entering like the parallel world in such a manner as like the scenario that I'm looking at. And right as Mike would be like straight away jumping into like the parallel world it should be on the floor. I'm looking like Lucas as well as Dustin as well. At that point, like would be like even more than their fear, like I'm looking like they would be concerned about like the safety of their friends might more than anything at that point. That like I'm looking like Lucas right then itself like chasing after Mike and basically like jumping into that portal and straight away after like Lucas following Lucas jumping into that portal is like the scenario that I'm looking right. And Brenner as well. And my impression right now is that like Brenner, for Brenner right now, maybe like there's a Brenner right now, like Brenner would be having like more, would be seeing 11 as like Brenner might be right now of like the intention to like maybe not to take 11's life. Like maybe Brenner might have more intentions and more experiments lying in wait for like 11, which like Brenner will be desperate to do all those experiments. So like Brenner might actually generally want 11 alive at all costs. It's also like my good intention. So like I'm looking maybe due to that, like I'm looking like the scenario maybe possibly being after like the monster will be like capturing 11 and basically going into the portal into like a battle world at that point. So like might Lucas end up being jumping into that portal and right then like Brenner like probably telling the like team members to like uh, basically come within to like the parallel world. But like I was looking like at that point, like Brenner's team members being like so extremely scared to basically enter into like the border into like the parallel world. So like at that point, like I was like Brenner being totally uh, frustrated and basically Brenner deciding Brenner being fed up and basically Brenner deciding to like risk it all and basically Brenner himself as well, like jumping into like the process right before like the portal will be closing is like the scenario that I'm looking at. That way like Mike Lucas along with like the monster like 11 as well as like Mike, Lucas and Dustin as well as like Pranav will be entering into like the battle versus like the scenario that I've described. So like the monster and the supreme like 11 would be like partly because of 11 being like extremely exhausted like 11 won't be like at all able to like use any of the power to like free herself from like, the monster. Yet like I'm afraid like, the monster won't be definitely not at all intending to like basically take 11's life either at all. Like in the 11 would be like I'm with 11 might the monster will be not planning on taking 11's life. So it's definitely also never saying like monster will be totally planning on basically like to they would badly want to like basically because like I was like the 11 the monster would be like only recognizing its like true self uh while it sees like 11 like even though the monster won't be like fully conscious or anything like still the monster will be able to like sense uh its true self in like 11 especially because like I'm looking like the monster will be definitely like the parallel version of the 11 at one point in like the system path it's definitely my computer so like the monster will be able to like see its like past self in like 11 and maybe like still like the monster won't be able to like recognize it and really like the monster will be just having would be like just having a different kind of like a feeling towards like 11 and like the monster would definitely having that actual curiosity towards like 11 yet like it won't be able to like recognize and realize why it has all that curiosity yet like I'm also going like the monster like taking 11 to the, somewhere deep within like the parallel world and like the monster then trying to communicate to like 11 is like the scenario that I'm having. And while this will be happening, I'm also like Mike, Lucas, and Dustin after entering like the parallel world will be like chasing after like the monster that would have taken away 11. And like as like Mike, Lucas, and Dustin will be chasing after like the monster and also like the monster and also like would be like so fast at that point and like even though the monster was injured and like the monster would be getting away and then was like Mike because of the thing as they would be like running after like the monster like him ending up running into like Hopper ambulance which is like the scenario that I'm about to fix. And like at that point like I'm also like them telling Hopper and Joseph to like the situation with like 11 like the monster having taken 11. So like while George as well as like Hopper would be like interacting with like Michael and Dustin. Like it would be at that point that I'm like runner would be like catching up to that and I'm also like George as well as Hopper like in an extremely irritating manner like them getting like totally irritated on seeing like runner show up at that point. That's like a scenario that I'm going to get like I'm going from that point on like them to be on like the search for when up to last 11 and like through that journey, like I'm the entrepreneur as well, totally being part of like journey at that point of like the scenario. that point I'm also putting like all of them being like totally irritated on seeing like Brenner show up at that point. Like the scenario that I'm also putting and yet and I'm also like them all telling like Brenner like to totally get lost. But like I'm also like Brenner still like basically like deciding not to not to leave not like definitely Brenner was only thinking on the lines as like odds of survival will be definitely higher. Elected will be definitely higher if he take as like a group rather than if he's travel zero in like much more parallel working here in the lines like Brenner would be things so like definitely regardless of how much like I'm looking like proper and all then will be telling the run up to like that loss and also the run up still like staying with them and following them around like they would be good. In that way like Brenner temporarily being part of like the team of like pop up Joes and Mike Lucas and Dustin they would be like frantically and really searching for like Will as well as that's the scenario that I'm looking at the game of the okay, so like definitely not the 300% right now with like the monster right now jumping at like precisely specifically runner like definitely not the 300% that like it won't be just like the monster like randomly attacking runner or anything like it definitely won't even be an attack. It's definitely not the anything like but monster it's in terms of different like the monster definitely would be like the battle bird version of like 11 amber different since like so like even in like the parallel world like I'm talking like in the case of runner like I'm like runner's role might definitely not be different like even in like the parallel world like the parallel version of runner as well would be like exactly like a scientist in like this very same like energy laboratory in like the parallel world might have been like the case it's definitely one of the trends. So definitely right now but like the since my terrain version is like the monster is like would be definitely like the current monster that is we like right now jumps at like Brenner will be like totally like the parallel world will be deep within that monster like that monster will be actually the version of the parallel version of like 11. So like 11 might have totally that monster might have like totally found like runner to be like a familiar face. It's like because of it knowing like the parallel version of runner like it might have found like the runner like to be like the familiar face like in the brain version. So like I'm also trying like I'm meaning not from the possibility that like the monster won't be having that actual clarity of like a consciousness or anything. So like I'm looking like the monster won't be able to like might not be able to like clearly like identify runner, but like I'm looking like still like the monster would be able to like sense some sort of like familiarity in like Pranaros like the scenario that I'm playing right now with like the monster jumping at like Pranar definitely like the monster right now won't be taking Pranar like at all. But like I'm looking like the monster right now would be taking Pranar to into like the parallel world is definitely another thing. But like I'm looking right now for like the monster like taking runner and like the monster like taking runner into like and leading into like the parallel world. That's runner of like the scenario that I'm looking right now. I'm looking so like basically in short like my prediction right now but like the monster right now jumping onto like I'm just point like especially right now but like runner just now having on like being 11 like we believe in like 11 calling like runner Papa like I'm looking like a similar scenario where like right now like the monster after like jumping onto like runner like basically like the monster not at all affecting runner but like the monster like making some noise trying to communicate with runner and at that point I'm looking maybe like the monster will be trying to like what the monster might be trying to communicate to runner by might be like monster will be like telling the word Papa will be trying to say the word Papa like definitely my concern anything. But like runner not being a runner and everybody else like only hearing like screaming from voice and like the monster like the scenario that I'm looking. So like this is like one possibility that I'm looking or like the possibility that I'm looking for like the monster to not be able to like recognize runner with like clarity but like still being able to like it's still feeling as if like it knows runner but like it's still not having the clarity as to like as if like runner someone important to like the monster along the lines like the monster feeling yet like the monster not knowing what exactly why as to like why yet and then the monster like really dragging runner into like the battle world. It will be like either one of these two properties that was the profession of the language. So like regardless of like even like the monster recognize runner as it's like Papa thinking it's like the runner for a battle version of runner Yes, because regardless of how Brenner react, still, the monster I'm definitely thing would be right, not at all taking Brenner's life and trying Brenner into the battle with through a bopper. Right now, it's the scenario that I'm going to bring another. So it's the minimum the Korean system right now. That's the dead body right now that Hopper have seen. And I'm also like right now Hopper and George would be in the opportunity to in the battle of the minimum of Korean system. So the dead body right now that Hopper right now has shockingly seen I'm going to bring that to be either the dead body of the battle world version of the or Barbara. It's definitely the Korean system. So it's definitely my impression right now for right now Hopper have finally fighting with I'm specifically about the impression that the build that they have right now found won't be the actual build, but will be the parallel version of build. It's definitely my impression and Hopper totally on seeing this itself Hopper might totally drifting away to for a moment towards Sarah but definitely in the parallel world I'm the parallel or the parallel version of will Hopper will be the parallel version of Hopper will be the father of the parallel version of Will in the parallel version. It's definitely one of the brain version. So definitely right now the different Hopper totally pulling out that thing from Will's mouth. And I'm also putting and Hopper totally as Hopper that they would be trying to say when I'm bringing definitely that thing in Will's mouth will be totally connected to the monster. It's definitely my better impression. So definitely the monster would be just right there hiding. Definitely my better impression. So especially as Hopper will be pulling that thing off with face I'm also putting at that point said I'm also bringing the monster attacking Hopper is the scenario that Hopper and Joseph the scenario that I'm also putting and then definitely putting Hopper using his weapon on the monster and I'm just putting Hopper to not be able to take out the monster but I'm still prepping Hopper through Hopper's weapon also putting Hopper somehow struggling his way into managing to basically scare away the monster the scenario that I'm also bringing and that way Hopper enjoys saving Will the scenario that I'm offering. And even at that point, Will would be just barely conscious, the scenario that I'm basically. Will would be almost unconscious, so I'm looking Hopper as well as Joyce then totally finding food from somewhere and basically giving Will food and basically slowly Will to slowly start to heal up and I'm also at that point I'm also Joyce will be only hoping patiently waiting for Will to recognize Joyce and call her mother. But I'm also Will slowly eventually opening his eyes and basically Will looking at Joyce and then looking at Hopper. And then I'm also at that point Will most likely calling Hopper Papa. It's the scenario that I'm looking. Definitely I'm still thinking about it, and that would be the biggest shock for Hopper as well as Joyce where uh, Will won't be a recognizing Joe's at all at that point. At the same time, Will will be calling Hopper Papa. Because the name the parallel word I'm definitely on something still thinking about those remembers and that that will be the parallel version of Will and in for the parallel version of Will the father the parallel word will be the parallel version of Hopper. Definitely my friend is that. And I'm thinking the parallel version of Hopper might have totally died. It's also definitely my he might have totally died protecting Will. The parallel version of Will might have been what might have happened. It's the payment of the rain. But also the next is the payment of the rain as for soul that belong to for the sort of Sarah even being present near next to castle bias in the parallel world will be especially because of would be also especially because of in the parallel world the parallel version of Hopper being the parallel version of Will's father and so the parallel version of Hopper as well. Exactly like the real world Hopper might have given that very same exact doll to his son, the parallel version of Will. Might have been what might have happened, and that might have been how and the parallel version of Will, exactly the parallel version of Sarah as well. Might have them both might the parallel version of Will might have endowed that doll very much. It's definitely my favorite and might have been the very same thing with the real world Sarah as well. She too might have only loved that doll so much. It's also definitely my interest, and that might be so reason for that doll ending up in in next to the Captain Bias and the Barrel World. That's definitely another thing. Okay, so like remember 300% right now, I think like the sound of that monster getting closer to like the road where like my 2000 and 11 are right now. And considering like right now for like the scenario to be like the monster right now that breaking open the door and basically that way entering that room. And I'm whispering like at that point, like I'm whispering like Mike Lucas and nothing shockingly as 11 would be shockingly seeing like the monster like basically at that point the monster would be like having Pranav would be carrying Pranav. It's like the scenario like carrying or dragging Pranav at that point. With like the monster like the scenario that I'm whispering and like Pranav might have totally gone unconscious from like maybe like the fear it's the limited reaction. So like at that point, I was feeling like the most of that by literally like holding front of him like and that would be softly seeing like 11 on that whole table that so like there are something bring like the monster like slowly straight away dropping in front of like the scenario where I was talking. The monster on seeing 11 like straight away dropping in front of and walking towards like 11 is like the scenario that I'm looking. At that point, like 11 would be so extremely exhausted that 11 won't be able to like do anything at all, and 11 will be so extremely scared. And so will like Mike Lucas and get like I'm looking like at like the monster be approaching closer and closer towards like 11. Like I'm looking like Mike definitely mustering up the courage and basically Mike trying to like basically do some throwing something at like the monster and basically trying to that way like get the monster away from 11 like the scenario that I'm looking. But like I'm looking straight away like the monster attacking Mike like the scenario that I'm looking and that way like Mike getting sidelined and Mike getting kind of like seriously to a certain extent, like Mike is kind of like getting injured and Mike won't be able to move at that point. And like at that point, I'm looking like Mike probably from like the sideline, like probably seeing like 11 probably screaming as like she would be like dragged away by like the monster and like the monster and also bring at that point itself like in that room, exact room where like Mike Lucas Justin and 11 are right now would be like where like I'm looking like the monster would be creating like a portal and basically like and at that point like I'm looking would be like Mike Lucas and Justin and would be like only seeing for the first time like basically how like the monster will be creating like how the monster creates like the portal like how the like how the fleet travels between like the real world and like the parallel world, like that actual process itself, like migration, something like shockingly and scared man or like seeing and that kind of thing like the monster like probably straight away basically at that point like the monster like probably like dragging 11 taking 11 and dragging 11 into like that and taking 11 into like that proper level and that way, like, also leaving was like 11 and entering into like the entering back into like the battle world is like the scenario that happened. So like at that point, like I was like Mike would be like screaming and shouting at like 11 and 11 would be shouting at like Mike is like the scenario that I'm describing. And even though Mike would be kind of like injured at that point and the like still Mike that totally and at that point still the portal would be like starting to like close. And I'm looking at that point like Mike totally like traveling his way into like entering into like that portal is like the scenario that I'm looking and there's like maybe for like Lucas and Dustin telling Mike to like don't do it like don't go into like the parallel world like it's too dangerous like but like I'm looking Mike not paying here at all to like the they're shouting at Mike of like concern and that was so concern and I'm looking that leave Mike totally entering into like the parallel world and going after like going to go after like the monster and 11 and like the scenario that I'm looking and precisely as like Mike would be entering like under something like definitely Lucas would be like uh, would be totally feeling as like yes not up to it but to like definitely Lucas would be extremely concerned for like Mike's safety so like under Lucas straight away like going after Mike as like Mike will be entering like the portal like Lucas as well entering into like the portal and then like I'm looking like the portal will be about to fully close so like that final last like few seconds like I'm looking like nothing already decided things that basically so as of like he has not the search as well, and basically Dustin like right before like the portal will be closing on the button, Dustin will be like the last person to enter into like that portal at that point, like the scenario that I'm looking on like and my further impression. We have to like the level for impression right now look like the monster opening it like now wide and basically look like about to launch like being short with that rock like about to bring away now like the scenario to be like the Lucas perfectly launching like the rock using the like slingshot and basically to like come out and basically like the monster swallowing that rock that way. It's like the rock going into like the monster's mouth and basically the rock getting swallowed by like the monster like the scenario that I'm looking at that causing like disturbance for like the monster, like the scenario that I'm looking for, like the monster totally feeling uneasy. Yet like and like the monster will be totally creating like a portal and maybe like deciding to like return back to like the password, but like right before that, like the monster noticing 11, and at that point, I'm looking, it will be like which will be like something to my premise on that, like this will be the very same monster, exact monster that basically try to like communicate with like 11 the first time 11 had basically entered into like the dark void during that kind of experience with new premise. So like this monster like recognizing 11 in such through such a manner, and basically this monster like right before it will be like escaping through the portal into like the dark world, like it taking 11 to the death was like the scenario that I'm looking for, and still thinking about the other friend. Okay, so like the Lima with Ren is right now with like 11 right now attacking like the monster, and right now with like 11 standing right next to like the monster, and 11 turning back and looking at Mike and basically saying goodbye to like Mike. Like I'm also bringing right now for like scenario to be like, and Lima with Ren for like 11 telling goodbye to Mike right now with because like 11 herself like totally being able to like most likely would be able to like to feel her body, and like 11 would be totally feeling as like like strongly as if like basically one more she used one more of her superpower like that will be taking her out as well. Like her body won't be able to like handle one more superpower usage. Would be along the lines 11 would be right now strongly feeling. So like this would be the 11 would be like only right now strongly feeling that she's about to die. The very next usage of her superpower would be along the lines 11 would be right now strongly feeling. So like but like I'm just right now for like this is happening right now as like with like 11 distracted from like the monster, and 11 like turning back towards Mike and saying goodbye to Mike. Like I'm looking at right now like the monster I'm also trying like taking advantage of like the distracted 11 to like quickly there's reinforcements certainly for like the monster to like and quickly grab 11 and basically quickly create like a portal and basically quickly leave escape into like the parallel world like 11 at that point like the scenario that I'm looking on that way like 11 without being able to like keep her superpowers like that way solely due to like that reason alone like 11 like surviving is like the scenario that I'm looking at, like 11 getting affected by like the monster and taken into like the parable, and like Mike totally at that point like rushing and running towards and jumping into like the portal followed by the Sandersons like the scenario that I'm looking at the bring and not bring. Okay, so like continuing on the Korean version right now with like 11's like superpowers right now turning like the monster into threats, and with like 11 as well disappearing, and if we're talking about like 11 would definitely be alive, and I'm looking what might have happened will be most likely the reason like 11 has already revealed that basically 11 was like the one who had opened like the gate in like Brenner's energy laboratory. Definitely, I'm also feeling like that exact power might have like while 11 was might have been if the monster would have definitely died and from like that ultimate super power attack of like 11 might have been what might have happened. Definitely, my grand version. Yet, like I'm also feeling like while 11 had used that ultimate super final bit of it last bit of like power of like 11 super power of 11 to like take out like the monster, like even though 11 might have only succeeded in like taking out the monster, still I'm also feeling like that attack might have to for like the portal to get opened between like the real world and parallel world due to like 11 superpower, and like was it like 11 might have straight away fallen into that portal and like the portal might have straight away quickly even closed within just like a fraction of a second or like within just a single second might have been what might have happened simply with the friend. So like right now 11 is totally and fully alive and the engine will be present in like the parallel world and like the monster would alone would have totally taken out and taken the life of like the monster might have been what might have happened. So definitely my very much and was like to be precisely due to like the portal might have only opened up and due to like living of power attack like the as a side effect like the portal might have quickly opened and closed like within just like a fraction of a second, and that's the reason will be precisely due to like 11 being like at the extreme limit of her strength and superpower right now being like the situation I'm also like because this is like due to that situation since like 11 is like kind of like far beyond her limit like I'm looking for like the portal might have quickly within like a second like in a fraction of a second maybe like the portal might have quickly opened up and quickly closed, and like with like the portal opening up and swallowing 11 into like the parallel world and quickly closing. And this might be the reason for like there being absolutely no portal like present even after like 11 would have made it to like the parallel right now. It's definitely my brain brush. So like definitely want to bring that like definitely something to bring like Hopper as well as like those right now would definitely be in like the Hopper school exactly in like the parallel world like and the thing right now then for like Hopper and Joyce to like find an unconscious 11 lying on the floor in like the hoping for the school in like the parallel world right now. So remember so like Hopper as well as Joyce are running into 11 in that Hopper's the school in like the parallel world right now in like scenario that I was thinking and like definitely understood a question as for like the scenario that I'm also saying for like Hopper as well as Joyce right now. Probably Joyce is right now feeling overjoyed like and like finally relaxed and thinking that basically he has to finally save her son. But like that would definitely and thinking my and that like that would definitely be like the parallel version of villain or the actual villain. That's definitely my preference. The actual hit which is from their teeth within like the parallel world of like the scenario that I'm so like without realization it's like I'm also putting scenario to be like boy being so extremely happy and thinking that she have saved her son well and basically offer as well for me being happy and relaxed and basically like them both will be like totally carrying Will and basically will be like trying to like get back to like Brenner to the gate in like Brenner's energy laboratory and get that way get back to the career but as soon as possible like offer as well as Joy would be that way to that with such an intent would be like trying to physically get out of like Hawkins middle school, but like they would be like, but like I'm looking at they will be making their way out of like Hawkins middle school, like them probably running into like 11. Just like the scenario that I'm considering. So like that way, like and unconscious 11 is like the scenario that I'm considering, and at that point, like I'm looking like for carrying 11, and like I'm looking at them for like basically like finally reaching like final like energy level of free gate, and from there like them being able to like make it back to like the real world and like about it like and then about like Hopper as well as like Jay like probably making it back to like the real world and like at that point like I was different like Mike definitely and until that point like where like Mike would be finding out about the like about like Hopper like saving 11 like I was different until that point like I was different like Mike totally would be like so extremely drowning in sorrow like with like that's Mike totally genuinely thinking that basically that everyone has died like so like as well as like because as well as until that point would be like had all of their hopes lost connecting to like 11 and totally would think that like 11 has actually like never would remember shit. But like I'm bring them getting the biggest shock of like a surprise one like they would be finding out about they would be seeing like finding out about like having saved 11 and that like 11 is like still alive and all that like with scenario that I'm sorry. And on top of that, like there will be even more overjoyed and like once they will be finding out that this will they have Hopper as well as George have finally saved Will as well, like the scenario that I'm looking. So like definitely at that point I'm looking like Mike Lucas and Dustin being totally extremely overjoyed and like think that like they have like that they have solved everything and really everything would be back to like normal and Mike Lucas and Dustin totally at that point would be think that now they only have to like basically bring down like find a way to like bring down like the monster. And basically like I'm something like Mike Lucas and Dustin and all of them like feeling so extremely joyful and optimistic and excited at that point is like the scenario that I'm going to bring in. Like I'm something like then totally then quickly rushing towards Will Smoke, but like Joyce and Jonathan would be like Will would be with like Joyce and Jonathan like but like I was like so at that point like Mike Lucas and Dustin like totally and I'm looking at that point probably maybe for like Hopper as well being present there and at that point like I'm looking like Mike Lucas and Dustin would be happily showing up to like Will Smoke but like at that point like them totally like only like finding it weird at that point that basically like with seeing like the gloomy face was like kind of like an unhappy face like Joyce as well as like Jonathan as well as like Priscilla pop up as like the scenario that I'm looking for. And like that at that point would be when like I'm looking like Mike Lewis and Dustin getting like the shocking reveal of like the scenario that I'm looking for like they would be seeing like Will totally falling like Hopper Papa, like the scenario Papa, like the scenario that I'm looking for. So like at that point I was like Mike Lucas and Dustin like totally being seriously and thoroughly being confused, like the scenario that I'm looking for. So like at that point, I was referring like 11 will be so extremely exhausted that basically 11 still won't be like waking up. Like the scenario that I was referring like. So like like at that point, all of them to be in like a confused like kind of like a situation and they could be like eventually once like 11 will be waking up and 11 would be like not saying would be realizing like basically that Will is like calling Hopper father like basically at that point just when I'm like 11 will be totally thinking of like that whole experiments of Brenner where like 11 had basically communicated into like a sort of communicated to like the bad word of like a photo of someone of like a photo of someone. So like at that point maybe like influence of might be like the one that might be like the one to like realize what's going on and maybe I'm looking at 11 that like I'm looking maybe Hopper as well as like Mike Lucas and Dustin and Joyce and Johnson and all of them finding out that basically that the will that's right in front of them is not the actual will, but like it's like the parallel version of will. Like basically them all shockingly finding that out through 11 at that point is like showing the scenario that I'm the bring another trainer. And I'm also like during that time still like Mike Lucas and Dustin will be like totally like trying doing their absolute best to like bond and form like friendship with like the parallel version of like Will. But like I'm also like the parallel version of Will like his personality and also like to be totally extremely like different to that of like the real world, which is definitely my impression on top of that. Like I'm looking like while like the real world will have like a high IQ, like I'm looking like the parallel version of will be like not having that much of like a high IQ won't be like especially intelligent. It's definitely also would be like the case also definitely the scenario that I'm taking of the topic. And my brain yet like I'm also like Mike Lucas and Dustin like eventually bonding with like with the parallel version of Will is like the scenario initial scenarios that I'm looking at and like Mike Lucas and Dustin and like the parallel version of Will as well as like 11 becoming that final team and basically them at that point, like basically like thinking of like their next strategical plan to like basically to basically bring back the save like their access to real world with and with that intent like basically them totally like making their next set of plan to like basically uh, go back into like the parallel world and basically to save Will, like the a real will, like the scenario that I'm looking. So like while this will be going on one side, like I'm looking like Hopper as well doing will be totally doing his own thing. Hopper as well as like Joyce as well as like Nancy and Johnson will be doing their own thing as well. So basically their own strategy and plan to like basically head back to like the battle world somehow to basically save like the real world, the real will. It's also like saving scenario that I'm looking on the and definitely I'm totally putting like so like since I got the micro impression probably saying like currently the will that like Joyce and Hopper have found will be definitely the parallel version of will and also like by the time eventually on like the real will would be like saved and brought back to the real world like I'm also like by then like I'm also like during that whole rescue like I'm also like the parallel version of will as well I'm also like would be during that time would be in like the battle world something what with the Black Knight with like something and 11 is like the eventual is the scenario that I'm looking and at that point I'm like watching during that podcast to like basically to find and save the real will like I'm looking like during that whole attempt like I'm looking like in the percentage of during that whole attempt like I'm looking like the parallel version of will who by then would have totally bonded with like Mike Lucas and the and 11 like still like I'm looking like the parallel version of will would be like totally dying in that black hole just to like save the real will like I'm looking like the most of most likely maybe taking the life of like the parallel version of will like the scenario that I'm looking like so like by the time like 90% of the 11 would be like finally like the Simpleton will be saving like the actual whole will like and still like they would be like feeling like totally disturbed with like and sad with like them having the loss of like having lost like the real version of will who by then would have been like one among them like they was exactly like with it's like the even the scenario that I'm able to bring him up with also, the theme of the brain session right now is for like to describe the center like software as well as like to like stay will and the spring that may eventually ending up being a such a sense like I'm looking like right now itself like as like the that's really trying to like save will and hope like mind seems to like the whole similarities with like will situation with like Sarah's situation in like the simple like basically my personal impression is definitely that like will was automated even though my according to my friend Sham on like will even though Sarah well might have had like a high IQ like but still I'm also like in the case of like the will I'm also going to be like trial version of will and also like the trial version of will won't be having like a high IQ but like But yet like I'm thinking like in terms of like personality and character of like the parallel version of Will, I'm thinking like to be like seriously extremely similar to like the personality and character of that of like Sarah of the story in like real life. Definitely my good impression. So definitely like in a way like I'm different like the parallel version of Will would be like after he would be like properly gaining back his like consciousness that kind of thing like and would be properly aware like and from that point on I'm looking like the like for the hopper like I'm looking like the parallel version of Will would be totally seriously and strongly feeling as if like of having got back this like dot because like I'm looking there to be so much extreme similarity in like the personality and character of like Sarah as well as like the parallel version of it. It's definitely my favorite while I'm looking like for Joyce would be like seriously extremely sad and even more worries for like her through some will like as to like where he is as to like the uncertainty of whether he's like alive or not in like the parallel world and all that is like the scenario that I'm looking to bring and in the scenario that I'm looking to bring I'm looking to bring and it's like definitely interesting right now with like Jill right now slowly waking up in like the real world with like Joyce as well as Johnson right beside like Will and with like Will like with like a smile asking therapy is like I was think like the next question from that like I'm looking to for Will to like ask like Joyce as well as like Jonathan would be most likely that like who are you definitely the scenario that I'm looking at. That being like the biggest shock for like Joyce as well as Jonathan, like the scenario that I'm looking at. So like I'm looking like initially for Joyce and Jonathan totally straight away assuming that they might have totally lost the like memory after spending so much time in that contaminated atmosphere of like the battle world. Like I'm looking at like Joyce as well as Jonathan totally assuming that basically Will might have totally lost his like memory. But like I was like eventually like they're totally finding out that like Joyce and Jonathan will be totally finding out that it's not that their will, but like it's like the parallel version of their will. Like their will is like actually out there in like somewhere in like the parallel world and basically then shockingly finding this out in like the eventual not like in like the near future it's like the scenario that I'm talking about. So and I was like as the day goes by, like I'm experimenting definitely Joyce deep down will be feeling something off about like with like the scenario that I'm looking like Joyce. I was like unlike in Johnson's case, like as well as like Mike Lucas understand like while they the more would only are assuming that basically it will be just like memory loss and memory loss issue for like Will that would be the reason for like Will not being able to like recognize any of them and like yet like I'm going to bring like it possibly like the since I'm going to bring like Will to be totally on seeing like Hopper will be calling Hopper as like his father and those different at that point I'm looking at things getting seriously kind of like confusing for like Mike Lucas and as well as like Jonathan but like in the case of Joyce, I'm different. Like Joyce still has like the days goes by. Like I'm looking like Joyce would be like deep down feeling that something is off with Black Will, as if like something just simply not feeling right. And I'm also like like that hunch or like that feeling, that kind of like a disturbed feeling about the thing to exist to happen within like Joyce after the days go by. Like the scenario that I'm about to begin. Like the reason for that disturbance doesn't happen. Like basically eventually being revealed in like to her and everybody else in like the recent years of them showing finding out like really that like the will that's right in front of them is like the bad version of the land of the active will is like the scenario that I'm about to begin. Okay, so like probably know the Korean version as now is that like even though it's like the real will that have been saved by Joyce as well as like Hopper and those I think still in the case of Barbara, like I'm looking right now with like Nancy remembering Barbara when like Mike is talking about like 11 to will basically like definitely I'm also different like even though Nancy is like so feeling like disturbed and sad that once again like I'm also different still I'm still sticking to my Victoria impression that like in the case of Barbara definitely it would be like it might have definitely been like the parallel version of Barbara dead body that like everyone might have always seen in like the dark void. Definitely not the fantasy. Like the real Barbara would be still alive and would be present somewhere within like the dark void. It would be totally that basically and I'm just like the parallel version of Will might also totally died. It's also like a possibility that I'm also correct. Then also like in the case of like Barbara, I'm also like the real Barbara might have been during that time when like Eleven had like communicate through the dark void to like the parallel world, like at that point like I'm thinking, like the real world Barbara might have been at deep within like the parallel world at a distant location when compared to like the parallel version of Barbara who might have died like certainly member friends, and that may be the reason for like 11's like communication especially getting as like 11 was like the for Barbara 11 getting connected to like the sad body of like Barbara 11 seeing like the dead body, finding like the dead body. It's like Barbara is like that, where it's definitely not the brain. So like I'm also putting like still leaning more towards like the possibility of like the of like the dead body of Barbara being of the dead body of Barbara being like that of like the bad version of like Barbara, and like the actual truth Barbara still being alive somewhere in like the battle world is like the my the impression that I'm still being on remembering. Okay, so like the female emotional rations for like my biggest understanding right now, like we'll be exactly telling with as to like how cool like 11 was and how she had all the about her superpowers and about all the effort that she had put into like to save Will. Like I'm looking for like definitely my because just like detailing out like everything, and basically at that point I was like Will on realizing how much effort that like 11 had put into like trying to like save Will. I'm looking for like that realization and also trying like to eventually create like an extreme guilt feeling within when you're settling on a friend, and I'm also like will eventually probably feeling have that absolute extreme guilt feeling from within skills that like will be the only thing that basically solely due to that him getting a better like by the months of like basically like 11 has to like die eventually die like will get on the line from the like will get it again, and I'm so like my career version especially that like window right now like my career and estimated only thinking that basically like and even when you get stuff right now the only thing that like the most of died like that like there will be only photographs in anything and down the lines of like there was only a single monster, and 11 has taken it out would be along the lines like will as well as like my kids of understanding now communicating, but like I'm looking like the scenario to be like uh eventually like after a few days like I'm looking like my kids understand as well as will like once again play at like the basement of like my home. And after that, like while they were returning, like I was different, like most likely that will once again see like the monster again is like the scenario that I'm doing, and I'm looking like either um, it being like around like Muscle Forest or like I was like it would be maybe like somewhere else like I'm definitely preferring like it would be definitely will that I'm looking for things to once again see like the monster from at a distance like the scenario that I'm about to bring, but like at that point like will would be like totally like dealing with it in like an extremely cunning manner that I'm looking like it's not getting will at that point like will still certainly manage it to like either hide from like the most of like the scenario that I'm in, especially because of like Will having been trapped and spent so much time like parallel world like Will might have by now learned about like how a lot about like the monster and how to like stay hidden from like the monster and everything is like the scenario that I'm over. Yet like Will be totally shocked because like Will at that point even while Will was trapped in like the parallel world and like Will might have only seen like a single monster. It's definitely not the trend. So uh, so will like basically would be shocked at that realization that like the monster is still alive. So definitely going to training. So like I'm looking like maybe will even coming to the conclusion that like protect about it or like there being more than one monster is also like scenario that I'm considering. In a way like I'm looking like will probably at that point like calling Michael and the over and like that will telling them that that they need to like destroy like the monster like it's definitely like and the thing like Mike totally would want to do that like want to take the life of like the monster which had played a part in like this video development, and that would be along the lines Mike would be the only thing. So like I'm looking like in such a manner like I'm looking like them deciding to like bring down like the monster. So like I'm looking and then I was thinking maybe in like in Muscle Forest, like maybe like eventually like Mike Lucas and Dustin as well as like Will trying to like and I was thinking like at that point like I was after like Will joining back to like Mike and all of their crew like and like Will would be like totally coming up like all sorts of crazy strategies and unique strategies to like totally bring down like the monster like the scenario that I'm looking like that was high IQ of Will and was like to provide like to be of that such great help for like Michael doesn't of thing. no matter like the situation they would be in, like the scenario that I'm looking. So like them setting up some sort of like an ultimate trap for like that monster to take out like the monster. Yeah, like I'm like the monster still managing to find them and basically like the monster and the super like taking one of them and at that point maybe being like trusted maybe like trusting or like because the super like the monster might take at that point like the scenario that I'm looking. Or like it should also be Mike. So like I'm looking like the rest of them like the monster is like taking one of them and basically if the problem like I'm looking like I mean like the others like one of them will be taken by like the monster and like tracked into like the password through one of the three like the scenario that I'm looking and at that point like the others like totally entering through the portal before like the portal will be closing and chasing out like the monster. So at that point like them by themselves wandering through uh, wandering through the battle board and still at that point Will would be like since like will have experience have spent time in like the battle board and the Will would be like the one leading the way and everything and then then even before finding Mike even before finding like the person that like the muscle would have contested and then coming them and like then they're running into 11 is like one possibility that I'm yes, so only one possibility that I'm looking like among like the other possibilities that I'm looking at, but maybe like it would be wild Will and Mike misunderstanding would be all like brainstorming and just trying to come up with like that actual first plan to like bring down the monster. And I was wondering if it would be at that point while they would be communicating with their radio phones that or like I'm like they would be in like Mike's basement at like Mike's home and they would be discussing and the radio phone would be right beside them. So like at that point, like through like the radio phone, like them shockingly hearing like 11's voice, like the public scenario that I made. So like that way, like them totally coming up with like the strategy to basically like at that point, like my totally last being so extremely excited and happy that basically 11's like still alive and as well as like for then totally having like the mission to like then deciding on like the mission to like basically definitely enter into like the battlefield and save 11. It's like the scenario that I was bringing. But still, my document is with like Brenner's that like I'm considering like the Brenner and of the laboratory, like everything, like all the workings of like Brenner and his like team, like all of them would have totally by then got arrested and literally Brenner, like end of the laboratory by then would have been permanently shut down, leaving with so the scenario, so like especially because of this, like I'm looking for like even there might have been definitely that huge supply of energy that might have been required to like keep like the gate in like for understanding energy laboratory to maintain it in like an open like status like the scenario that I was so like after the that's like I'm like for instance the laboratory being shut down and that causing like the gate to within like for instance the laboratory to get close to like the scenario that I'm basically without it getting any supply of energy like it's getting like it automatically causing like the scenario that I'm basically so like I'm like so like the only hope for like Michael and Dustin and will to be able to like they will be around that time will be like hearing softly hearing 11's voice through like the radio phone like the only way for them to be able to like basically make it to like the for them to be able to like save 11 and bring 11 to like the real world would be only like the monster would be the only way into like basically like the portal that the monster will be creating to would be like their only way to like basically for them to be able to like enter into like the battle world and save 11 like the scenario that I'm looking at. So like my doctor impressions are like exactly like in like the state in which Joyce as well as like Hopper had found Will in like the parallel world right now. Like it would be in like a similar kind of like state, trap state in which like I'm looking like uh 11 as well would be in during that time is like the scenario that I'm looking. So like the only thing 11 would be able to do at that point in like that trap kind of like a situation on top of like extreme exhaustion and basically and the trap situation and everything like 11 won't be able to like free get herself free herself by herself so like the only 11 would be only barely having like just enough like superpower for us to be able to communicate to access like the radio phone at like the real world mic of like the real world mic in like the real world mic so that you know from like the trap situation where 11 would be like 11 using her like mind superpower to like usually to be able to speak through the radio phone of mic would be the scenario, and that would be how mic and all of the others will be finding out about human being the scenario that I was trying to. Then after people Michael Lucas understand all of them basically stealthily them deciding not to attack the monster, but to stealthily patiently wait for the monster to come again into the fox, muscle fox, and basically them stealthily hiding and basically them possibly literally once maybe them succeeding and basically with their stealth and hiding and the monster would be hunting as usual, and the monster returning through the portal on the tree. It's the scenario that I'm doing, and through that portal Mike looks and up it basically making it finally making it through the battle world. Mike looks and up and will finally making it through the battle world. Scenario that I'm doing, and maybe them from that point them only frankly end up really searching for that's what's beginning to find and save 11 is the scenario that I'm so this is one possible scenario that I'm looking or the other possible scenario that I'm looking in while Mike Lucas and Dustin and Will all of them would be stealthily would be attempting their secret infiltration to the battle world through the portal the monster will be creating still the plan going wrong with the monster spotting one of them and basically the monster possibly abducting one among them it will be except for Will and to make it together Mike Lucas or Dustin and the monster updating one of them and dragging them to the portal to and entering into the battle world and the others going after and basically entering into the battle world as well and and then also from maybe after entering into the battle world at that point there would be absolutely no trace of where of the monster or the friend of monster would have abducted. So that one maybe might or one of them maybe come or will come to the decision to basically for them to for find and save 11 and to ensure to basically to 11 as soon as possible however whichever way they can and then there's different and they would have only since their goal would be to basically to primary goal might have been to save 11 at that point. I'm assuming they would have only brought might have even showed up to my footballs well prepared with all the health supplies and everything, healing supplies and everything. So I'm assuming them going up to Hawkins with school in the battle world, then finding 11, then 11 would be exactly in that trap situation in that Hawkins to exactly is the scenario that I'm referring. So them saving 11 and then totally treating 11 and 11 recovering and then I'm referring 11 along with them basically searching for random same motor that maybe it's being Mike. So that way 11 even after being treated and even after being healed 11 that being that much more worried for Mike to see for Mike to safety for the monster basically the positive the monster taking Mike to so with that I'm looking along with 11 with Lucas and Dustin basically beginning their whole quest to basically find and save Mike in the battle world. This technical possible scenario that I'm looking for developing another surrendering. Okay, so but surrendering right now as for of right now entering an the future I'm looking definitely it might only have to do with Brenner most likely might have to remember that the Brenner would be even though Brenner would have died I'm looking would be most likely having a boss definitely content could be that main boss that might have totally recently might have only contacted Hopper definitely member of the Remersion boss. And he might have only threatened Hopper. He might have told Hopper to basically as one of Hopper's short to the energy level and if he doesn't that basically he would he might have only threatened Hopper to basically eliminate the eliminate Mike Lucas and the just and James Johnson and all that. Maybe such a threat might have been made through a phone call by the boss of even Brenner that the boss of even Brenner might have done something like that to Hopper. Certainly not understand basically the preparation for Hopper without even any resistance or Hopper totally casually entering a suspicious stuff to be certainly just that. Especially not the reference. So my representative or my representative person or it might be the boss of even Brenner that might be right now the reason for Hopper entering the suspicious vehicle I'm looking definitely the boss would be having plans for like Hopper secondary of the primary so like since like Hopper had basically successfully since like basically Brenner had earlier like way back like had basically sent like some shepherd into like the battle world and straight away itself like shepherd wasn't able to like survive like the battle world. Yeah, like since like Hopper have probably traveled so far into like the battle world and had even rescued Will and was successfully able to like return back to like Brenner's energy laboratory into like the real world without after like saving Will as well as like also ensuring like the protection of Joyce as well since since like Hopper was able to like do so much like under the current technically the boss of even Brenner with whom the Brenner will be right now most likely might have threatened Hopper and might have told Hopper to like basically show up to like Brenner energy laboratory ASAP and they're like able to like him assigning like giving the order and assigning the task for like to Hopper to like basically to explore like the parallel world and basically to report all the findings, like explore more like the parallel world, like deep within like the parallel world and to like basically to like so we end up with like there would be like kind of like a radio phone like thing through which like I'm looking like the task for offer will be to like explore deep into like even deeper into like the parallel world and for us to like basically like report all the findings to like was opportunity like report all the findings to like the boss of Steven Brenner. So that like that would be like only might be like beneficial to like that main boss of like just like he would be having its own like experience like experiment like which he might have or the in that time might have assigned like Brenner if that name of the like right now like Brenner's like he might be right now probably deciding to like use Hopper to like make progress in those experiments of like the exploration of like, the battle world and the findings of like the battle world and everything is definitely might in the end. So and according to my popular impression, doesn't know the thing like Hopper will be solely doing this to like solely for like the sake of like the safety of like Mike Lucas and Dustin and Anarchy and Jonathan and Joyce and also most definitely my other emotion. So and I'm also maybe for like in this like exploration work given imposed onto like Hopper by like even Brenner's work like and like maybe it will be during that deep exploration of like the parallel world that ambassador maybe eventually hop up findings that Sarah that but like it won't be like that with Sarah but like the parallel version of like Sarah just like eventual possible scenarios that ambassador again Hopper bringing like the parallel version of Sarah into like the real world as like and like Hopper like making the parallel version of Sarah has gone out that way. It's definitely my consideration, but like I'm like bringing parallel version of like humans living in like the parallel world to like the real world, and then like staying and living in like, the real world will be having like a lot of like negative eventual future consequence connecting to like possibly like the balance between like the real world and like parallel world and all that. Like an individual differences of possible scenario that I'm looking for the frame. Yeah, so like continuing about the reimbursement right now for like even after like a month later, like we put like the campaign game between that once again between like Mike Lucas Dustin as well as Will like and like with like Mike ending like the campaign shows like without like talking about like the proud princess and like the lost knight would be like definitely uh Mike taking a conscious decisions to implement the everything because like I'm looking like Mike will get only even to after like whole month like I'm looking Mike will definitely be seriously missing still seriously missing 11 and I'm looking like would be Mike would there will still be that extreme disturbed feeling within like and sadness within like Mike connecting to 11. So it's definitely my consideration and to be so reason for like Mike consciously deciding not to like talk about the and tell the story about like the proud princess as well as like the lost knight because like Mike would be totally being able to like see himself in like the lost knight and basically like would be Mike would be only able to see 11 in like the proud princess. Definitely my consideration. So like that would be like too sad and disturbing for like Mike and so Mike would have consciously decided not to like tell that part of the story in like the campaign games. It's definitely my consideration also the film the reaction right now for like the person give that like Nancy right now giving to like to us and even though Nancy says it's not like a person like I'm like that gift will be most likely a camera definitely my contribution a brand new camera for like Johnson like a way better camera than like the one Johnson has with like the my consideration. Okay, so like definitely one of the Korean right now after like in the snow like basically also right now basically leaving like boxes in like box like basically and there's something like that and there's something most likely might be like symbolically representing that leaving of flowers in like the cave, which like one of my friends has asked like Mike about like why Mike wasn't talking about like the story of like leaving like the flowers in like the cave in their campaign game. Like I was just like the flowers leaving like the flowers on like the cave but it might be symbolically represented through like basically leaving of like bottles on in that box in this like forest and I'm going to bring it that forest would be most likely Buckford Forest in certain the president and since like Mike Lucas and Russell and all of them had actually seen 11 for like the first time in like Buckford Forest like I'm going to bring that definitely the copper like basically like keeping this box in this like forest and basically and I'm referring to deep within the spot that like might have placed this black box and basically placing this uh, waffle within that box. And like definitely, like definitely through Mike, like and also like Copper might have learned that basically 11 loves like waffles so much. Definitely was kind of so like 11 might like waffles so much. So like and like Copper leaving like waffle onto that box would be most likely that Copper like paying respect for like 11 because like Hopper will genuinely believe even to the person that basically 11 has died had died protecting like Mike and the kids. It's definitely would get on the lines that Hopper will be only thing. So like because of all that effort that 11 had put in to like save all of them and to be of help for all of them like basically like Hopper will be only would have only recognized all that like extreme hard work and selflessness of like for 11 and like I was like definitely in like 11 like memories like I'm remembering that Hopper will be like totally seeing that box and placing of like that box onto like that box basically that box will be seen as like uh and by Hopper like Hopper is totally seeing that box as like 11's grave and basically uh and then also like Hopper placing that waffle on Christmas night would be that exactly pop-up like placing that would be like for pop-up that would be like placing flowers on like the grave of a person. Definitely I was very uncomfortable. Like that way placing like flowers which like elements like so much that they are within that box might be what might be like right now happening. Definitely might be very uncomfortable. Or like I'm going to produce that it might be like due to that act in like the past where like 11 had basically stolen bottles from like that supermarket like basically that might be how like maybe Hopper might have came to the conclusion that like might have felt that basically even like waffles alone. Definitely for example, that might be the reason for like it being slightly waffles that like Hopper uh placed the thing that like pop in the middle of that was definitely my opinion. Okay, so like the name of the reason right now with like Jonathan Will as well as like Joy like celebrating Christmas at their home. Like I'm looking right now definitely I'm looking like the monster like another monster to like totally make its like appearance and infiltrate into like from like the world like another monster like totally quickly showing up into like which home is like the scenario that I'm looking at. While like I'm looking like in an instant like while everything was like happy with like Jonathan Joy as well as like Will like like the monster showing up and quickly this time the monster might be affecting Joyce. It's like the scenario that I'm looking the monster affecting Joyce and basically leading into like the battle, but taking Joyce into like again taking Joyce into like the battle but straight away. It's like the scenario that I'm looking at like so like I'm looking like within just like a few seconds like I'm looking like the for that joy and happiness like turning into like extreme horror and suffering and sadness like and shock with like the scenario that I'm looking right now in the okay, so like the treatment and reimbursement right now, and for like even after like one whole month, like basically we're still having like parts of like the monster within this body. Like I was like it will be probably due to that like the monster will be most likely through that 1 month back when like especially like Opera like joke had found with in like the pattern but like at that point like that thing that was on like will fail like I'm just saying like that thing might have been like left on Will's mouth by the monster, I think the monster itself is definitely number three ambition, and number three, as to like how like these monsters will be multiplying, and like humans will be like the carrier for like the monster to like grow, for new monsters to be born and grow, and basically just to like for like the monster to multiply, like to be able to like multiply, humans would be like the carriers, definitely my doctor members. So like I'm different like definitely through that like thing that was on like built out like basically the process will be like basically a monster like each time like whenever like a human will be like getting affected by this monster like I'm different like these monsters will be like through that thing in like the mount like I'm different like a new monster will be getting born within like the human and then the so like my doctor operations that like when Hopper as well as like Joyce had found when in basically that certain for in like the parallel world like at that point like the process that might have been taking place would be like that thing in like with mouth like it might have been like slowly and like keeping with trapped and like slowly like understand like the phone might be like slowly it might, the process of like a cocoon being formed like surrounding like when they are taking the body uh, of wind covering wind entirely might have been like the process that might have been going on slowly might have been the beginning stages of that process definitely was the premise. So like after like how exactly it might be working like I'm looking like eventually that as time of that like a cone this might be that forming all over like the body covering like the entire body of like that size human, each human that the monster would be affecting, and then like I'm looking like from within that something like I'm looking from within like that human like I'm looking like the monster to be like slowly growing and basically then like I'm looking like the human would be like eventually dying. And like the human would be only at that point functioning as like the carrier for like the new monster to like grow. And basically eventually like that monster would be like coming out of like the human and like out of like the cocoon. And this might have been like this cocoon might have been what like Hopper might have seen like near to that castle bias in like the parallel world when like Hopper has made it towards castle bias in like the parallel world like at that point like that exact thing that was like near to like castle bias might have been the phone definitely might have been impressive. So like my top three impressions are like all those great number of skeletons like that Joe's had and Hope had seen in like Hawkins school, like the parallel world, along with like the like dead body as well as that someone that basically all that might have been the dead body and out of it, the people who had died as like carriers for like newer and newer monsters who like basically grow out of like the human might have been what might have happened with the limit of humans and this might have been the reason for like those great number of this might be the reason for those great number of skeletons in like organ schools certainly my brain version so like right now with like that that a part of like the monster like basically even right now to like the percent in like within like when even after like the whole month like will be precisely due to like that monster right now will be like slowly growing like even without like will right now being in like a certain trap and like a certain kind of like a state which would be absolutely necessary and represents for like the absolute growth of like that monster and for like that monster to be like fully grown and to emerge like that one like situations might be condition might be like absolutely necessary yet like I'm something like still even right now with that will moving around like I'm still like that bit of like that monster from within will might be like struggling to like survive from the things when and understand this might be the best reason for like that part of like the most of that basically still willing to like system right now being present within this and right now with like the lightning striking and like winds being able to like see the like instantly like lightning strike like wind even being able to like see like the parallel world at that point it won't be like will hallucinating but like it will be actually that will is solely due to like the monster growing or growing with from within will like and the things would be like the sole reason for like due to that monster's power like it would be the sole reason for like will right now would be able to like see like the parallel world from like even Will's home in like the real world is like in the United States. So like the monster would be having that power to be able to like see like the parallel world while even being present by like the monster is even present in like the real world that's in the United States. So like those powers like Will would be like slowly getting those powers. But like I'm like Uh, Yet, like at the same time, will be right now slowly it's moving closer and closer to that. It's definitely my consideration because like the more time passes, like I'm looking at the more like the monster will be like growing from the thin bills, and like the more the monster will be growing from the thin bill, that the more closer the bill would be like closing in towards like that is like towards like ending bills that towards reaching bills. They might definitely my personal theory and prediction. So like the film and the theory and prediction right now is that basically with like right now when being disturbed on seeing like finding like the part of like the monster even after a whole month. The sense will like but the person right now like disturbed will still totally trying to keep that a secret from like Jonathan as well as Joyce and then the student disturbed will right now like going back to like the nine table to like have dinner Christmas dinner just like Jonathan as well as Joyce but like I'm just bringing like right then as like Bill would be like sitting beside like Jonathan and Joyce. Like at that point, I'm assuming most likely like at that point, I'm assuming like definitely like the lights in that room would be like would be starting to like play like the scenario that I'm observing, making kind of like seriously like the scenario that I'm observing. And at that point, I'm observing like both Joyce as well as Jonathan will be scared, thinking like and both at that point both Joyce as well as Jonathan will be scared, thinking like someone is going to like jump out of like one of like the wall at that point. But like I'm for like them not like even though like the lights will be consistently blinking at that point, like I'm like Jonathan as well as Joyce looking around and like them not seeing any monster at that point. And then like when they look at like Will when Joyce and Jonathan at that point, if you're looking at Will like I'm like Will would be like extremely like would be having such an extreme facial expressions like the scenario that I'm whispering. So like at that point that whispering with Jonathan as well as Joyce having like maybe feeling like confused because like uh and at that point I'm whispering like not confused, but like at that point, I'm looking like Jonathan as well as Joyce noticing something extremely like an extremely facial expression for Will, and at that point, I'm looking like Will's possibly vomiting like more like the monster into like the table like scenario that I'm looking for, and that being like the biggest shock for like and I'm looking like at that point like Joyce most likely screaming and like uh basically that being like the biggest shock for like Joyce as well as Johnson at that point is like the scenario that I'm looking and with that like how I'm looking like season one of like Stranger Things would be that ending exactly in the scenario that I'm looking. So like the feeling of the person that I'm sitting on it really bad. Like right now, slowly, like the monster will be growing more and more within from within will, and like the more the monster would be growing within from within will, like the more will be like inching closer and closer to dying like the scenario. So that was like the scenario that I'm looking and I'm looking like through during the and during the process, like and like the more like the monster will be growing, like when the more like Bill would be gaining like the power of like the monster. So like I'm looking like without much great delay, I'm looking like eventually like Bill basically having access to like the powers of like the monster to be not only be able to like see like the parallel world maybe at all times, but also from like the real world to be able to like see the parallel world at all times that like one property that I'm looking for is like subtly and on top of that like I'm looking for like with auto like eventually gaining like the power to like create forces as well with like the scenario that I'm looking from like the real world to like the parallel world like will that solely due to like the monster growing from within will like will being able to like have the will also getting like the temporarily getting like even by inching closer and closer to the like will still getting access to like the powers of like the monster will just create forces from like the real world to like the parallel world like scenario that I'm looking so like eventually I'm focusing like Michael Lucas and also like figuring this out like and will as well like figuring this out as to like what's going on the spill and all that like basically and then like all of their tasks would lead to like basically find the parallel version and but like literally them figuring out about like in like the parallel world the existing parallel version of like the victims humans in like the real world so like I'm looking like them all totally placing all of their hopes in like basically like the parallel version of like Brenner being alive and I was by then like they would be like totally figuring out that basically the the initial first monster was like actually like the parallel version of 11 in like the parallel world, like basically like the parallel version of Brenner, like experiment on like the parallel version of 11, like going wrong with like what has that created like the first monster, just like the parallel version of 11 that way turning into like the monster might have been what might have happened, like this might was the revolution, but like Mike Peterson of finance will like also figuring this out eventually like the scenario that I'm looking. And at that point, like I'm looking, they will be all placing their hopes on precisely finding like the parallel version of Brenner. Like they will be only placing all of their hopes in like the parallel version of Brenner being alive, even though the real world Brenner has died. Like basically, they would be placing all of their hopes in like the parallel version of Brenner possibly still being alive in somewhere in like the parallel world. So like their goal at that point for Microsoft and will like their ultimate goal will be to like find to go to like the battle world and desperately search and find the battle version of Brenner and to seek his help to like basically to they will be all placing their hopes that like to give the battle version of Brenner alone. And I'm looking at they will be also thinking that like it will be like solely due to like the solely due to like the parallel world being like the way it is like dark, empty and unclean like state and usually I'm also bring like micropercent of sin and will like figuring out that like the password is like totally infested with like a great number of monsters as well and also like eventually them figuring out about that as well as like the scenario that and them also figuring out that like it's totally due to like the battle version of kind of that basically like the very first monster was created and that way like the battle world even ending up like the way it is like dark cold empty like solved due to like the parallel version of another like Michael and will eventually figure all this out and so like then their biggest goal and task would be like at that point those different to be to like find like the parallel version of Brenner in like the parallel world and to like seek his help to be able to like because they will be placing the hope that the parallel version of Brenner would be like the only person who would be knowing how to save Will, how to heal Will, how to destroy like the monster that's like growing from within Will and like they would be totally think that that would be like the only their only chance at being able to like save Will is like the scenario that I'm referring. So like even after rescuing Will, like I'm looking like the whole dilemma and like the situation for like all of the microcosm understands Will and all of them will be like to save Will from that would be like their next biggest goal and task. So like the only time they would all be seeing that this is the only time they have to like basically save Will is before like the monster grows to the point of like it eventually taking Will's life and basically coming out. So that's the scenario that I'm looking at. So like with that in like all of their minds like I'm looking at minds because kind of thing and will like desperately something in like battle to find like doctor the battle version of Dr. Brenner and I'm looking like he would be still alive into the southern still hiding somewhere like battle world and eventually I'm looking at the period is computer like I'm looking then eventually finding him and then eventually getting into like this way, maybe not in like the future, but still in like the future, eventual future, like I'm looking then eventually finding like the paradoxical forever and then somehow getting into like basically to like basically through him like then totally getting like the cure to save Will and that way like them like using that for your own will and basically that way like the monster grow and by then like the monster would be like almost like about to like almost like seriously grown that basically would be like usually will health at that point would be like seriously deteriorating by then it's like the scenario that I'm looking would be like nearing its death at that point like the scenario that I'm looking but still at that very last moment like I'm looking them finally getting like the cure from through Dr. Brenner and basically somehow and basically or like through something like Dr. Brenner's lab and then somehow finding like the cure getting their hands on like cure and then that way like saving Will at the last moment by destroying like the monster from within it. And that way like Will once again being saved. It's like the against the scenario that I'm basically on the again on the brain version. So like the name of brain version right now is for like how exactly like the favorite variant Sava might have ended up with in like castle by in like the parallel world. Like then like and then just hiding in like the parallel world. Like another the thing like Michael Remembrance that I'm still keeping on to definitely like so other than that I'm leaning more to definitely for like the parallel version of Sava still being alive somewhere in like the parallel world. It's definitely my favorite. So like I'm looking it might have been at some point while like and I'm also thinking like maybe Sarah might not be by herself, like maybe the parallel version of Sarah's mother might be that. offers like X-White, like the bad version of Sarah as well. But even maybe might be with Sarah in like the bad version. It's also like the same version. So yeah, and I'm also definitely like the bad version of Hopper, my diet, but still I'm leaning more to about it as like the bad version of like Sarah, like mother, Hopper's ex-wife might still be alive somewhere in like the battle world, and like them two might be like still alive and secretly hiding somewhere in like the battle world. So like I was hoping it might have been at some point like I was like at some point like in Mudwood forest in like the battle world, like I was hoping they might have been trying to get away from like the monster like both the bad version of Zara and Satmata like might have been trying to like might have seen like the monster product in all of them in like Mudwood Forest, so like in their whole struggle to like quickly get away from like the monster like the bad version of Zara might have thrown like the her favorite toy somewhere in like Mudwood Forest second reservation, and like Will might have like found that toy, and like Will might have like since like Will was like lonely, he's totally lonely back then, like and like Will might have totally picked up that toy, and basically the Will might have appeared as a wild Will might have kept it with him, and Will might have like that way like the toy might have ended up in like castle bias and like the battle world where Will was like had been hiding at one point. It certainly might have operated. So this might be how like the favorite toy of Sarah had ended up in like castle bias in like the battle world of certainly might have been understand right now. So it's like living in 300% right now, it's bad like even though right now Sophie have like that massive change when it's like that and they have scam down basically Steve has that let go of the video and on top of that even going to the extent of like buying a camera. If you right now being able to understand Jonathan and even going to the extent of like buying that a camera for like Jonathan to totally make it up to that Jonathan but in a itself even so like basically that's still doing all done and basically Nancy getting back to like the Nancy right now continuing her relationship with like, Steve. That Steve right now, even though Steve would have let like has that character shift and has turned into like a has let go of his like ego and has turned into like more of like an understanding kind of like an empathetic kind of like a character. I'm still emphasizing like eventually in like the future. And also for me once again that ego is self which would be like right now still lines hidden within Steve, like I'm like eventually the within people to like still come to like the sort of like the scenario that I'm looking for you. Initially I'm looking for like building like feeling the future and the different and Steve would be that Steve's character would be like once again changing, so gradually changing over the years in that in the future. And I'm also for that's like scenario that I'm looking at. And I'm also like maybe like from Steve to like even Steve John Nancy in like the initial future like scenario that I'm looking on at that point. I'm also like Nancy totally breaking up with like Steve and Nancy at that point is like into future like really realizing that like this entire time like Johnson was right all along or Steve was wrong all along like that was entire time like Johnson exactly was like the right choice was Nancy and it was solely that like Nancy had failed to realize that or see that like this entire time like eventually Nancy like come to such a realization kind of like a scenario at that point and in like the people who the future like might have very understand like Nancy at that point like breaking up with Steve and then the different like Nancy eventually and unproven like eventually that they are being like even more troubled with like the whole bill situation and everything like I'm spiraling into like even more serious trouble eventually in like the future and like I'm like eventually that once again bringing like Nancy and Johnson once again closer is like the scenario. And I'm simply reminded so that like Barbara, like the actual Barbara might not have been not right. Like it would be like only like the Carol boys with Barbara that night, whose dead body might die. Who might have died by like that. So Barbara would be still alive somewhere like the which is in like the Carol boys is definitely not differential. Literally Nancy like somehow finding out about this like saving this bigger scenario and that point like the same situation like with Will and everything like and with like Barbara and everything like we will once again bringing Nancy and from that was up and basically the theory that way like Nancy totally eventually and like eventually like the future like Nancy like totally embracing like the embracing her mistakes on basically like which would be like Nancy totally feeling that that at that point that what she was had made a lot of wrong decisions in her life And that like even Barbara going to the same like was like the eventual consequence of like one of those strong decisions that she had taken with the around the like that and to be leading at that point in like within the future. While Steve would be like eventually in the future that would be breaking up like Nancy. All this realization and the different most likely might be happening for Nancy like the scenario that happens to that like this whole situation bringing like once again bringing Nancy and Jonathan closer, not only just closer, but like closer to the point of like them Nancy is probably seriously falling into love with like Jonathan and basically them like having a relationship like basically the closeness and like the bond between Nancy and Jonathan is really turning into like a relationship uh as like any initial future scenario that I remember for English. And Jonathan, even right now, would be like, even right now, like Jonathan would be, would definitely be aware that it's leaving and we have brought back into like, the relationship to like, to, like, still impossible, like, from Jonathan's point of view, Jonathan would be like, not at all, even, like, wanting a relationship for him, like, in his life, because, like, Jonathan would be like, patiently waiting, because, like, Jonathan, would be like, even though Jonathan might might right now be able to like sense that basically like the change in that case that character like still I'm also that John still would be like strongly feeling that basically still to like things to that no um like that basically Steve is not like the right dog for Nancy which is still like what John would be feeling in like the scenario that I'm looking so like John was going to be like this application is waiting for like the day I put that placing all that hope and like literally waiting until the day usually Nancy like realize that thing like the future and basically back to like Jonathan would be along the lines that Jonathan would be thinking and then would be like that exactly to be like the eventual scenario like that under the happens usually like the this initially like the future like might be the way conversion. Also the clear reintroduction for that since these monsters are like so extremely quickly prone to that the center flood and the citizens like even Nancy as well as like Johnson had basically they have basically endured like the monster all the way to their home just by like just a small quantity of blood from Will's home. Like basically definitely because of all the stories that we have to remember but like in the entirety of like the town of things that there won't even be like a single hospital. So definitely my first remember. So what like I'm also trying like when it comes to like the whole holding between like the real world and like the parallel world through which like the game in like some of the other things like passages that and through like this like and I'm definitely putting that that experiment in which like 11 was like involved sort of in like the whole game within like and we'll never be being able to like stay focused in the right now so that it can go and like doing that experiment that can still maybe stick into my book impression that like the holding between like the real world and parallel world which might have happened that day like myself that holding might be and still think about the representation that like that holding might be like the closest in that exact location in like within like of the laboratory but like the holding would be like the distance between like holding would be increasing more and more like the more like the distance is from like runners and the laboratory definitely not with the library. So like even right now recently just so like even since like the single months back itself like when like the one that had basically since like blood had been redrawn like the monster from like the parallel world to like the real world even in Hawkins middle school like I'm also like even Hawkins middle school would be like not at such a great distance from like Pranav and Adlina so like definitely my personal remembrance is that like of two possibilities that one possibility is that the possibility for like there not being not even a single hospital in like the entire like the town of the other possibilities basically that like, there might be lack of hospital. There might be maybe only a single hospital in that kind of the town of and that single hospital might be on the very borderlines of like the town of Hawkins. So that basically the holdings between like the real world and parallel world, which might be spanning across like the entire PFF area of like the town of Hawkins. That distance between like the holding will be like maximum at like the location where like the hospital would be in like the borderline area of that the town of District members. So like, this might be the source is about like the monster like all the monsters like literally not showing up specific to like the hospitals 56% in like the now of the exactly migrating to the Android. Since it's like so quickly around to like the center flat, it's getting him as a student.